Welcome to episode 2 of Object Translations. In this next episode of this series, I will be looking at how to translate a bunch of garlic into a stitched sculptural ropework piece. So in this week's episode of Object Translations, I'm looking at translating this rather special homegrown garlic into a sculptural ropework piece. This is a very left of field object I've chosen after last time when I did the ceramic vase, which translates easily because the shapes are very familiar from previous work that I've done. So this is something that is completely different and a total challenge. So for me, the reason that I've gone for this is because there are so many elements that create this overall shape. So we've got the roots at the bottom, and then we've got this gorgeous bulbous shape, and then we've got this very long stem, and then this sort of the braiding at the top. So if I break this down artistically, there's a lot of elements here that make this up as a whole. So the challenge for me is going to be creating each of these elements and then bringing them all together to create the final piece. I haven't got a plan yet of exactly how I'm going to do this. I think this is very experimental for me, and so what I'm going to need to do is to sit down at the sewing machine and just start working on form and seeing what I can come up with, and then start linking things together. So I think this process is going to take me a lot longer than it did with the vase, but I shall report back once I have made my first investigations. I am midway through workshopping this idea of how to create a stitched rope version of the garlic. So I thought I would just give you a little update. The first thing that I started working with was the 3mm rope. Now what I learned from my last episode of Object Translations was that the 3mm is no good for doing structural work, but it's really good for doing sculpture because actually it's quite mouldable. So I've been working on creating these sort of mini forms in the 3mm rope, and then I'm working out how to create the same shape as the garlic. So this is quite tricky because actually getting it to mimic the cloves inside is quite difficult, and getting the shape of the vessel correct to sort of work from. So that's what I'm currently working on. So my idea at the moment is to basically work with a form like this and then to somehow mould it to create the garlic cloves in, what would be the garlic cloves inside. So that's where I've reached in my process. I'm going to get back into the studio and carry on working on it. The next process will be essentially to create some kind of mould and a way of perhaps steaming the rope to help it keep the form. Creating garlic in stitched ropework is definitely one of the most challenging things that I've ever set myself. So in the end, after quite a few trial and errors, I decided that I would have to approach the stem of the garlic and the bulb of the garlic as separate problems. So the first bit that I tackled was the bulb of the garlic, and the way that I did this was to create a sort of small vessel form, sort of just a round form, and then I moulded it afterwards. And the way that I did that was that I used a handheld steamer and a brown paper form that I sort of made like these mini cloves like this, and then I just applied lots of heat, and like a milliner would shape a hat, I moulded the form to that brown paper structure. And then I let it set for overnight and then attached this jute tassel. So the tassel, while actually it makes the piece less functional because it can't sit flat, it really beautifully mimics the roots that are on the real garlic. So I wanted to have that element in there for me because that is a real part of the texture of that piece. So that was really important to me that still had that. And then the second element that I needed to tackle was of course going to be the stem of the garlic. So the second challenge was to create the lid and stem of the garlic, And the way that I did this is I created 2 individual sections that I then joined together. So the first bit was to make this long stem, which I did out of 3 pieces of rope. So essentially you've got this triangle effect where the 3 pieces have been stitched together, and then I braided them at the top to mimic the braiding of the garlic leaves. And then the other section was a very basic, just a sort of flat small circle, and then like I did with the bottom section, just moulded it with some steam, and I used my knuckles to create those impressions of garlic cloves, and then attach the 2 sections together. So together the 2 pieces make this one piece that mimics the garlic. So I think this was definitely really challenging because I had to think about all the individual parts of the garlic that make it what it is, and how to translate those into the stitched rope work. So it was definitely a case of, usually I kind of think about work in terms of one long piece of rope and how I'm going to create that, but this was definitely, I had to break it down and really look at the things individually to put them together. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of Object Translations. I'll be back next time with another object to translate into stitched rope work, and I'll see you next time.